where bandwidth and circumstances allow for that. Please, however, keep your microphones muted unless you have been invited to speak. The meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made publicly available following the event. It's also broadcast on UNITAR's YouTube account. We encourage all the participants to use the chat function throughout the session to introduce yourself, share relevant resources and reflections, and submit questions to us. The Secretariat will use the chat to share information and links during the meeting. Next slide, please. So let me briefly take you through today's program. We will begin with opening remarks from Ms. Björg Sandkjær. She's the Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination at DESA, followed by Ms. Michelle Giles-McDonough, Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR. We will then have a brief presentation looking back at 10 years of SDGs in practice and some of the main trends and lessons emerging from the series. This will be followed by a moderated dialogue, which will examine the capacities most needed to accelerate SDG implementation, drawing on perspectives from different sectors and areas of expertise. We will then conclude with some reflections and possible next steps from Mr. Niall Pierre of UNITAR. Next slide, please. It is now my pleasure to invite our first opening speakers. Ms. Björg Sandkjær is the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. ASG Sandkjær, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ola. And good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening to people who've joined us online for this, I think, very relevant and exciting discussions about SDG implementation. So, Excellencies, ASG Michelle, distinguished colleagues, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this 2026 edition of SDGs in Practice, which, as we heard from Ola, is organized jointly by us here at DESA, together with the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, UNITAR. And for the past decade, this series has provided that dedicated platform for practical learning, for capacity building, and for collaboration in support of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. And I would like to thank UNITAR, as well as other contributing partners, for your sustained commitment to this initiative and for sharing your knowledge, experience, and practical tools over the years. Because, colleagues, this series has evolved alongside the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, from supporting national planning, monitoring, and stakeholder engagement to addressing resilience, innovation, partnerships, and acceleration. And one consistent lesson has emerged, and that is that implementation depends not only on policies and commitments, we need those too, but we also need capacities of people and institutions to translate those policies and commitments into action. So technical expertise remains essential, but countries and stakeholders also need the capacity to coordinate across institutions and sectors, to use data and evidence, to engage communities, to mobilize financing, to manage partnerships, and to adapt to changing circumstances. And this is now particularly urgent as we are rapidly approaching our deadline of 2030. Later today, we'll be launching the progress report on the Sustainable Development Goals. I thought I would give you a sneak preview of the results that will be launched, or that will be made available through that report. So the 2026 report on progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals makes very clear the scale of the challenge. So of the 139 targets for which trend data are available, only 36% are on track or showing moderate progress. This is about the same level as the past few reports. Nearly half of the targets are showing only marginal or no progress, while about 15% have regressed below their baseline. We know some of the reasons for the challenges: conflict, climate change, growing inequalities, constrained fiscal space, and declining development finance continue to place immense pressures on national institutions and implementation systems. But we also see through the data and through the progress reporting that progress is possible. We see how social coverage, social protection coverage has expanded. Maternal and child mortality has continued to decline. Access to electricity, safe water, sanitation, and digital connectivity has increased, with electricity now reaching 92% of the global population. Data availability for SDG monitoring has also grown dramatically, from approximately 330,000 data points in 2016 to more than 3 million by March this year. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but having that data is essential for identifying where progress is lagging, for directing support to where it's needed most, and adjusting policies and interventions as conditions change. These gains demonstrate what can be achieved through strong institutions, through appropriate tools, through inclusive partnerships, and sustained investment in capacity. At the high-level political forum that's kicking off this week, we will be hearing a number of voluntary national review from a range of member states. And key messages from this round, the 2026 voluntary national reviews, reinforce the findings that I just referenced. We see how member states continue to identify challenges related to coordination, to financing, to data, to local implementation, and to stakeholder engagement. They also highlight the importance of national ownership, of whole of government approaches, and meaningful stakeholder participation. So we find that the central challenge is to strengthen the capacities that are needed to translate, again, these priorities into accelerated implementation. We see how capacity development needs to be rooted in national and local priorities, connected to practical implementation challenges, and designed to strengthen institutions and systems over time. It also needs to be inclusive and to draw on the knowledge and experience of those that are too often excluded from decision-making. So, dear colleagues, as we move towards the rest of the seminar, let me also close here by thanking all participants for joining us today. I would like to invite all of you to engage actively, to share your experience, to help us refine and continue to identify those practical capacities, those partnership and those learning approaches that are needed to accelerate progress. On our part, as UNDESA, we remain committed to supporting member states and stakeholders in strengthening the capacities that are required to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and deliver on sustainable development through 2030 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ASG and Chair, for those remarks and for setting the scene for today's discussion, including a stark reminder for where we stand today globally on implementation, which is so important to keep in mind for this discussion. So thank you so much for that. It is now my pleasure to invite Ms. Michelle Giles-McDonough, United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR, to make her opening remarks. ASG Giles-McDonough, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola, and thank you, Assistant Secretary General Sancher, and welcome to all of our participants online. It is a real pleasure to join you today. Let me begin by thanking UNDESA for its leadership and for the partnership that UNITAR has been privileged to sustain over the past decade through SDGs in practice. My sincere thanks to ASG Sancher for the close and productive collaboration between our teams. This partnership demonstrates what the United Nations can achieve when we bring together policy expertise, data, learning and capacity development capabilities, and implementation experience around common purpose. That of supporting member states and stakeholders to turn the promise of the 2030 Agenda into meaningful benefits for people and planet. For 10 years, SDGs in Practice has provided a dedicated platform for learning, training, and applied exchange. Through this initiative, we have convened more than 100 sessions, mobilized hundreds of partners, and reached policymakers, practitioners, educators, civil society, the private sector, and many others working every day to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. That is an important achievement. But today is a moment not only for us to look back, but also to ask a more important question. What have we learned about the capacities that matter most? And what must we do now differently, with greater urgency, in the remaining years to accelerate progress towards 2030? The SDGs remain our shared blueprint for a more sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous future. Yet, as ASG Sancher has just outlined, the progress remains uneven. At the same time, the operating environment has become more complex, while the window for delivery continues to narrow, testing our resolve. And it means that capacity development cannot be business as usual. Climate shocks, conflict and fragility, technological disruption, widening inequalities, fiscal constraints, debt pressures, and declining trust in institutions demand integrated responses and new ways of working. From UNITAR's perspective, 5 lessons stand out as we look to 2030. First, capacity development must be grounded in real implementation challenges. Learning has greatest value when it helps people solve concrete problems, improving a policy process, using data to inform budget decisions, designing effective partnerships, strengthening national plans, or translating an SDG commitment into better services and outcomes for communities. Second, individual learning matters, but it is not enough. Skills need to be connected to institutional change. The real measure of success is whether learning strengthens systems, improves decision-making, and enables organizations to perform better over time. Third, the capacities required for SDG implementation are evolving. Technical expertise remains essential, but today's leaders and institutions also need systems thinking, strategic foresight, data and digital literacy, innovation capabilities, behavioral insights, and the ability to work across sectors and disciplines. Fourth, capacity development is not a one-way transfer of knowledge. It is a process of mutual learning. Some of the most valuable insights emerge through peer exchange, collaboration, and sharing of experiences across countries, regions, and sectors. And fifth, capacity development must be inclusive by design. It must reach communities and groups who are too often excluded from formal learning opportunities. And it must be relevant to diverse country contexts and accessible across geographies. These lessons inform UNITAR's new strategic framework for 2026 to 29 and our engagements and delivery of services to member states and partners. For example, our CFOL Global Network of Training Centers supports local implementation of the SDGs by translating global commitments into tangible local action. In 2025 alone, the CFAL network reached 162,000 learners of the near 600,000 individuals engaged through UNITAR's learning programs worldwide. To support system and institutional change, UNITAR is working with the government of Seychelles and with the UN country team in Cameroon to apply foresight and a systems approach in national planning. And to help build capability at scale, the LEAP FAST initiative is helping to embed sustainability competencies into higher education curricula, preparing the next generation of sustainability leaders. Indeed, one of the clearest lessons from a decade of SDGs in practice is that the most effective learning experiences are practical and action-oriented. They connect challenges to tools and tools to practice. They create space for peer exchange. They draw on evidence and real-world examples. They bring together government, the UN system, academia, civil society, and the private sector. And they are strongest when they're not treated as standalone events, but as part of a wider effort to build sustained capacity for implementation. The launch of the SDGs in Practice Learning Library is therefore timely and important. By bringing together the knowledge, lessons, tools, and methods developed over the past decade, it can support policymakers, practitioners, and educators who are looking for tested approaches as inspiration to create opportunities or address challenges in their own contexts. So as we look forward to the years ahead, perhaps the most important question is not how many people have we trained, but rather what changed because of the learning. That is the standard to which we must hold ourselves. UNITAR remains committed to working closely with UNDESA, our academic and private sector partners, and of course member states and many others, to ensure that capacity development accelerates SDG implementation. Today's gathering is an important opportunity to reflect on a decade of learning and also to consider how to scale action, working with the urgency, discipline, and ambition that the decisive next years demand. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ASG Giles McDonough, for those remarks and for highlighting the importance of capacity development to accelerating implementation and really the need to move from business as usual and focus on innovative ways of scaling actions that is well grounded in real challenges. Also take note of the very good point on the SDGs in practice itself, then on the need to focus not only on high numbers in participation, but also in the quality of engagement. I think that's a very important notion. I also join personally ASGs and shares in expressing DESA's gratitude for the collaboration we have had with UNITAR over these 10 years. So thank you so much with that, and we look forward to continue this collaboration. Colleagues, that concludes the opening segment of our event. We're very grateful to both Assistant Secretaries General for joining us this morning. And we will now move on to the next program item on the presentation segment. So if you can project the slide, please. Thank you. So I will use the next few minutes just to provide a brief overview of what has emerged from 10 years of organizing these SDGs in practice. It's not intended to be a comprehensive evaluation of every session and every year. Rather, it's a high-level reflection on the evolution of the series, including what the topics has emerged sort of as trends, the partners involved, and the learning approaches that has been used in some of the sessions over time. So the central question is not simply what activities were delivered, but what they tell us about how capacity development can better support implementation. Next slide, please. So over the past decade, the SDGs in practice has delivered 106 sessions across 10 annual editions. Together, these sessions have addressed all 17 SDGs and involved more than 250 organizing partners. For the period from 2021 to 2025 alone, available reports record more than 11,800 registrations of participants, although reporting methods have varied and some participants may have attended more than one session. The number of sessions have remained relatively consistent over time, about 9 to 12 sessions each year, with a peak of 15 sessions back in 2018. A major change was in 2020 and 2021 when the series shifted to virtual delivery due to the COVID pandemic. This, however, significantly expanded global participation and enabled us in the series to reach people who might not otherwise have been able to participate in person during HLPF. Next slide, please. So if we look across the decade, we can broadly identify three phases. From 2016 to 2019, emphasis was really on building the foundation for implementation. Session focused very much on the awareness and understanding of the 2030 agenda itself. Much of the focus was on the development of different roadmaps, integrated planning, monitoring, and setting the stage for policy coherence and stakeholder engagement in SDG implementation. From 2020 to 2022, the focus shifted towards resilience and recovery. COVID pandemic changed both the substance and the delivery of capacity development through this series. And sessions addressed resilience, inclusion, digital delivery, and new forms of collaborations. From 2023 onwards, there has been a clear emphasis on acceleration and transformation. Topics have included data innovation, citizen-generated data, foresight, just transitions, partnerships, and implementation at scale. And I think this evolution really reflects the broader journey of the 2030 agenda itself, moving from understanding and planning through crisis responses towards the current need to accelerate implementation and achieve impact at scale. Next slide, please. The 106 session covered a wide range of issues, but three broad groups have emerged. First is working across actors. That's a very clear notion that has come through very clearly. Partnership and stakeholder engagement were the single most frequently addressed theme, followed by inclusion, gender and human rights, and localization. The second is strengthening institutions and implementation, including data, monitoring, governance, planning, and policy coherence. And the third is on building knowledge and addressing thematic challenges, including education, climate and resilience, health, peace, and digital innovation. This notable finding, before the next one, the notable finding is that many of these of the most frequently addressed issues were not limited to one sector or one SDG. So the interlinkages is quite an important notion as well. And I think this reinforces the idea that capacity development for the SDGs is not only about acquiring skills or technical knowledge, it's also about strengthening collaboration across different sectors and stakeholders, institutional effectiveness, and the ability to work across complex systems to deliver impact. And now, next slide, please. So the series has always relied on a very multi-stakeholder approach. The UN system has been the most frequent partner, but the series has also involved academia, civil society, governments, regional, international organizations, and the private sector. I think this also very much reflects the need for multi-sector and stakeholder engagement for the SDGs, so it's not surprising. For the 6 sessions that we counted involved partners from at least 2 sectors, and 19 involved at least 3 sectors. This diversity matters because implementation challenges cannot normally be addressed by one institution or sector alone. bringing different perspectives into the learning process helps connect policy, technical expertise, practical experience, and local knowledge. At the same time, this figure suggests that there is still scope to deepen the participation of some groups, particularly on the government side, the private sector, and some local actors. The participation figure also demonstrates the value of virtual formats in expanding access. At the same time, in-person engagement remains very important for building relationship, deepening exchange and learning, and supporting more interactive forms of engagement and learning. Next slide, please.
They have to go around.
One of the practical outputs from this 10-year journey is the SDGs in Practice Learning Library. The library brings together the full archive of sessions from 2016 to 2025, allows users to search by year, SDG or theme. Its purpose is really to extend the value of the series beyond when it's actually happening and the annual HLPF period. Many of the tools, presentations, and other informations developed through the different series remains useful after the live session has ended. So the library helps preserve this knowledge and material and makes it openly available to anyone around the world. It also provides a foundation for future series, as it allows us also to build on earlier work rather than starting again from scratch each year. And I'm asking colleagues to kindly share the link in the chat. Next slide, please. So drawing these findings together, there are 4 broad lessons that could be highlighted. First, policy alignment strengthens relevance. And this is not surprising, but linking sessions to various HLPF themes and the SDGs under review obviously connects learning with the current policy discussions and bringing targeting the right audience, so to speak. Second, applied and inclusive design supports learning. Sessions have been most useful, we believe, when they are moved from identifying a challenge to examining the tools, practice, and real examples, while ensuring diverse participation. Third, partnerships, data, and evidence are themselves core capacities. Collaboration and the effective use of integrated data should not be treated as a secondary issue. They are very central to implementation. And fourth, different modalities serve different purposes. Virtual delivery can expand access, while selected in-person formats really builds trust and ownership and deeper interaction, of course. So for the next phase, this might suggest maintaining a practical and implementation-oriented focus, linking annual sessions even more closely to national, perhaps, and local challenges, strengthening follow-up and empiric change, and possibly a better way to track how participants apply the knowledge and tools that they gain through this series. So the central question is therefore, how can future learning initiatives, including the SDGs in practice, help build, apply, and sustain the capacities needed for SDG implementation? That is also the question that we hope the panel will help us explore. And next slide, which is the last, I promise. So the analysis presented here today draws on the Decade of Learning report, which reviews the content and the evolution of the 106 sessions delivered. The report provides more detail on the content of the sessions, the evolution, and the lessons that may inform future capacity development work. It's available on the SDGs in Practice webpage, and the link will be shared in the chat. And I encourage all of you to consult the report and the learning library, possibly after today's event. So that concludes my presentation part. We'll also make sure that these slides will be available on the website, so we'll make sure to upload that after the event. And next slide, please. That takes us to next program item for today, this moderated dialogue on what capacities matter most for accelerating SDG implementation. The discussion will be moderated by Mr. Darian Stibbe, Executive Director of the Partnering Initiative. Darian, thank you for joining us today, and I now hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ula. My name is Darian Stibbe. I'm the director of the Partner Initiative. We are an international NGO codifying and building effective practice in multi-sector partnerships, including significantly through the Partnership Accelerator Programme with UNDESA, which supports individual and institutional capability building. My apologies for the casual attire. I'm in a European country undergoing a heat wave at the moment, but without any air conditioning to go with the new climate. We've had a wonderful introduction from the ASGs. It is clear that capacity development cannot be business as usual. We heard we need to move beyond individuals, we need to build institutional capability. We heard that we need to move beyond how many people have we trained to what changed because of the learning. And we were urged to really drive forward through urgency, through discipline, and through ambition. In this session now, we are going to be looking really at what are those capabilities that are most needed and how do we build them at scale and quickly. We have 4 years left of the SDGs. We have no choice but to be building capability, individual and institutional capability, as quickly as we can at significant scale if we are going to impact the final SDG indicators. So we have an amazing panel, as you would expect. To talk about these issues, we have Andrea Clayton, who's a senior lecturer at the Caribbean Maritime University. We have Alice Shackelford, who is the director of the UN System Coordination Division at UN Women. We have Mahoko Kumamoto, who's the director of Division for Prosperity at UNITAR. We have Mr. Khaled Mashfiq, the regional liaison for Asia and the Pacific within UNOSAT, part of UNITAR. We have Marie-Claire Dushimumukiza, who's the country manager for the UN Global Compact Network from Rwanda. And we have Patrick Paul Walsh, who is the Vice President of Education and the Director of the SDG Academy. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to start with you, and Andrea, and ask my colleagues to please spotlight Andrea. And Andrea, you are based in ASIT. You are based in the Caribbean. You have been working as a lecturer at the Caribbean Maritime University. You have also developed programs with youth, I believe, sort of earth entrepreneurs. We've heard already a number of colleagues talking about some of those new capabilities, things like everything from systems thinking to AI to data analysis. But from your perspective, what is needed most in SIDS? What's been most successful to date and what is most needed moving forward?
Thank you very much for having me as a part of this very important discussion this morning. Good morning, everyone. What we recognize, and building on what was previously shared, yes, we've traditionally looked at capacity building as human capacity, but as was mentioned earlier, there is the need for institutional capacity as well. What we're also recognizing is the importance of indigenous bottom-up knowledge sharing that has served a significant role in helping local and regional persons at the lower level to build resistance, which is primarily what the SDGs are about. When you consider all 17 goals, ultimately what we want is for people who are able to solve problems that we don't yet know about and emerge from them as they come up. So we recognize, yes, the need for systems thinking, but we also recognize there's a place for it, the bottom-up approach, what I like to refer to as in the indigenous knowledge. We also have to look at strengthening our ability to make informed decisions and collaborate across the different sectors. We recognize that we companies, businesses, governments, we tend to still operate in silos, and that helps to perpetuate the problems that we experience. Jamaica, for example, is just emerging from, well, still emerging from the catastrophic Hurricane Melissa, Category 5, that we experienced last October. And we're still trying to figure out how to make sure there's nobody left behind, which is what the SDGs are also about. And at the same time, we're back in the hurricane season, building that resilience to be able to continue to develop and not necessarily be so impacted that we're reversing the growth that we experience. So we want to be able to adapt to the emerging challenges. We want to be able to consistently deliver results. And a part of that is both horizontal and vertical collaboration between the persons on the ground and the persons at the top.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. Indeed, yeah. So the indigenous knowledge is hugely important. We need the collaboration from on the ground to on the top. We want to drive it forward. Yes, we need systems thinking, but we also currently operating in silos, perpetuating the issues, and so that aspect is going to be hugely important as we come to the second half of the discussion, really about how do we build capacities at scale. Thank you so much, Andrea. I'd ask if I can ask to spotlight Alice Shackelford, who has been the resident coordinator in Costa Rica and is now sort of working as with UN Women. Alice, we've again similar sort of question. We've heard some of these, the systems thinking, the collaboration, the data analysis, all of that. But in the end, there are going to be certain issues, and gender is one of them, which are cross-cutting that need to be integrated. I want to get your take on these capabilities.
Okay, thank you very much, and lovely to be with all of you. And thank you, Darian, and all the colleagues and all the ones who are listening in and trying to get inspired by this exchange of today. So I want to reinforce one point that has been made about that one of the real opportunities that we had with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and SDGs was really the issue of interconnectivity. And to understand really as the UN system that we cannot keep looking at things just through our mandates, just through our little boxes, but really looking at that interconnectivity, right? And I think, that has been a very, very strong focus of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, but we have not fully taken advantage of that as the UN system. And the fragmentation and the closed vision, as I said, very much driven by our mandates, has not given us always the opportunity and the incentives to really break those and really fully endorse the 2030 agenda call for, looking at a much more holistic, interconnected world. And this is not only for the UN system, this is also for the governments that we and the member states that we work with and we partner with, and we are a reflection also of those challenges. Absolutely, as you said, for us, gender equality is very critical. As you know, this is really a commitment of all the UN system. I mean, the UN Women leads the UN system in delivering better gender equality, but as we know very well, this is at the core of our principle and values and our charter and our Declaration of Human Rights. And gender equality, unfortunately, is still seen sometimes as an add-on to the 2030 agenda, even if we manage to have it as an SDG, SDG 5, and cross-cutting across the other SDGs. But still, let's be very frank, we still need to make that point and to push and remind the rest of the UN system, resident coordinators, humanitarian coordinators, DSRSGs and others, that really needs to be central. And And this is for sure one of the biggest, challenges that we've seen. Now, this is also connected to other elements. I mean, one is the translation of our commitment as the UN system in critical incentives and performance indicators of our colleagues from the leadership to down to all the system. And we know that's not always the case. We think also that, we've got a gender unit, they will take care of it. No, everyone has to be a leader on gender equality and integrated across all the areas. So that's for sure. One is, the issue of leadership and the issue of really translating that in critical incentives. But we have also, let's also be very frank, we also have lack of implementation of gender mainstreaming. For example, we have a lot of guidances, and still I remember as resident coordinator or as member of a UNCT many times looking at documents completely gender blind, where you even have to say, what's happening? Why are we not even considering? We are talking about leaving no one behind. We're talking about human rights-based approach, but then we don't translate that in that analysis and that focus. And that's also connected to the data, naturally, gender statistics, sexually disaggregated data and evidence, which is not consistently available. So that is a challenge with which, we also adapt to, to deal with when we look at really capacity development. We look how to move ahead. And we'll just finalize by saying that the Secretary General a couple of years ago did launch the UN System Gender Equality Acceleration Plan, exactly with the emphasis of saying we need to do more in accelerating, especially if we look at SDG 5, but not only gender across all the SDGs, which are very, very, as we know, very much behind. I'll pass it over to you, Darian, careful of the time, and you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice. Yes, it's such an important point that gender can't just be seen as an add-on. It needs to be far more integrated, far more intrinsic. Also, take a couple of other of your points really essential about the data and evidence not consistently available, and that's going to, I think, come up later as well, of the need of data and evidence, but also just the fact that there's a lot of guidance, but that does not necessarily translate into practice. And so whatever capacity development, it cannot just be around training people or making people aware of things. It is about how to integrate absolutely into their practice. Thank you so much, Alice. I wonder if I could ask Mihoko Kumamoto from UNITAR to talk a little bit about exactly some of these things around data, but more generally, what your experiences have been from UNITAR's Capacity for the 2030 Agenda initiative, beyond sort of data, but also I think into strategic foresight and other elements as well. Thank you, Mihoko.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Darian, and once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this important dialogue. Absolutely. We talked a lot about speed and scaling. I would also like to highlight the importance of quality implementation. So what I mean by that is, for example, making sure our progress is inclusive and also anticipatory approach, and then whole of society approach. And here, let me highlight 3 key points. And the previous speakers already highlighted, but statistical capacity, and of course, statistics and also data that really helps us understand where we are making progress, what kind of progress we are making, who is left behind, and also where we are lagging behind. And also but what is important is we should use data not just for reporting, but use data and information to help better decision-making procedures, better budgeting, etc., etc. And also statistics, of course, there is data coming from official data sources, but there are other responsible data sources we could tap into. For example, administrative data, geospatial information, and also citizen data. For example, what we have been doing in Grenada and St. Lucia, we have been working with OECS to enhance their statistical capacity to better assess the current situation and use that information for better decision-making, budgeting, planning. Now, second point, Daria, you mentioned strategic foresight, and also UNITAR Executive Director mentioned now we are faced with multifaceted crisis. And one of the biggest challenges is it's becoming more uncertain and more unpredictable. And here, strategic foresight will be extremely helpful. This is to test the different scenarios and assess not just current risk, but future risk, so that our approach becomes much more anticipatory. Like, for example, what we have been doing in Seychelles, we have been working with the Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning, Trade, and Investment to enhance their strategic foresight capabilities so that their planning becomes much more anticipatory. And then the third point, and here multiple speakers have pointed out the importance of multi-stakeholder approach, particularly engaging the private sector much more. And here, I would like to mention, we have been working closely with UNDESA and other multiple organizations for this initiative, UN SDG Learn. And out of this initiative, this new initiative has come out, which is called Capabilities for the Future Hub. We are working closely with UNIDO and the University of College Dublin to bring together representatives from public sector, private sector, academia, TVET, so that we could co-develop and co-implement learning materials that truly stick, micro-credentials, to facilitate green and digital transformation that many countries have faced with. So once again, I would like to highlight the importance to check quality aspect of progress, and here importance of data, strategic foresight, and the multi-stakeholder approach. Thank you, Daria. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Miyoko. In fact, one of the last points you made about this multi-sector approach, even for training, was made in a comment by Salma Mohi-Eldin just now, saying from a tourism perspective, future learning initiatives should focus on building capacity for sustainable tourism, not only increasing awareness. Tourism organizations need practical skills in green innovation, digital transformation, and sustainable destination management. So I guess that's one good example of some of the technical knowledge and skills that are required within business as well as within governments as well. And thank you for making the point about strategic foresight. Indeed, when we're talking about more and more complex environments, and therefore the need to be far more participatory in the planning as well. So thank you so much for all of those points. Khaled Mashfik, you are working with UNISAT, and which is all around data and geospatial data. It's part of UNITAR, I believe. Could you tell us just a little bit about the types of data that you have that UNISAT makes available, and then sort of how it can be used and what the capabilities that are required in order to be able to make the best use of the data you are able to provide?
Thank you very much, Darian. And I think, like all other speakers, the theme is quite closely there, that we have to use data for improved decision making. So about 25 years ago, United Nations Satellite Center, or UNOSAT, was established to exactly do that, to support governments, humanitarian actors, and wider UN system and the member states to utilize space-based data such as satellite imagery, geospatial information for emergency response, and as well as to support disaster risk management, climate resilience, and informed development. So as you requested to know that what kind of data sets we use all sorts of data from satellite imagery to spatial information to even statistical information. And what we basically do, I can give you one example from Gaza. Last year, when information was very hard to come by, the satellite derived analysis that we produced was one of the objective source of information for understanding the situation on the ground. At the same time, like when we think about the earthquake in Myanmar in 2025, our analysis supported identifying and prioritizing about 6.3 million people requiring assistance in Mandalay region in Myanmar. So these are some of the data sets that we use. And when we started our journey 25 years ago, data was very hard to come by. There were only few satellites orbiting the Earth. And now the challenge is completely opposite. We have too much of data, and sometimes making sense of data becomes very, very hard. But at the same time, the solutions are also emerging. Within the last few years, we have seen the rapid growth of AI, machine learning, cloud computing, and this kind of technology is currently allowing us to make sense of this huge volume of data. So what we see at the moment, there is no more challenge on lack of data, but rather making sense of the data and turning it into information that allows for informed choice decision making and better planning, better budgeting, better risk reduction. So these are some of the challenges that we see at this point. But at the same time, we also have to realize many of the countries, many of the member states do not have the necessary capacity to utilize this very powerful tool and technology. So a lot has to be done in terms of training and capacity development. So many of these open data, open source AI models, machine learning models can be utilized by the countries in need, least developed countries, small island countries. So they can make best decision of their limited resources. And the last point I'd like to emphasize, like all other speakers, is about institutional capacity development. Instead of doing 1 or 2 learning sessions, how do we really strengthen the capacity of an institution, of a system, so the government can make better decisions without needing external support. So that is my comment. Thank you. Over to you, Darian.
Thank you so much, Khaled. And yeah, I think it's a real demonstration. There is now so much more data available. There are new technologies available, new AI models for processing the data. But in order to do this, to turn this into information that is then utilized in planning and execution, there are significant capacity needs to be built. And as you suggest, it needs to be institutional, not just sort of individuals with particular skills. Thank you so much. Now we're turning to one of the key actors in the delivery of the SDGs, which is the companies, business. And we have Marie-Claire Dushimukiza, who is the country manager from the Global Compact Network in Rwanda. So from your perspective, what type of capabilities, capacities does business need to be able to play its role as a partner in development?
Thank you very much, Darian, for the floor. So going straight forward from the business perspective, so I would say over the past decade, one of the most persisting capacity gaps that has been identified is the ability to translate the SDG commitment into action, particularly from the business perspective. So UN Global Compact, we work with the businesses across more than 160 countries globally to embed the 10 principles in the area of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. while also advancing the achievement of SDGs into, making sure that they integrate those into their strategies and operations on their basis. So through this mandate, we recognize that achieving 2030 agenda requires a strong partnership, of course, from the policy perspective, from the academia and also knowledge perspective, and also it requires the private sector action. So we recognize that there is so many efforts that are being done by the countries in integrating SDG into national development plans. However, implementation remain constrained by weak institutional coordination, as highlighted by my previous speakers, limited technical expertise, inadequate financing, sufficient data. Khaled was explaining about data for evidence-based decision-making, limited cross-sector collaboration. Another key element is also from the private sector capacity to operationalize sustainability. So businesses, particularly SMEs, they face challenges in integrating sustainability into corporate strategy. So if I give you an example, conducting human rights and environmental due diligence is one of the key areas where you still find gaps. Reporting on their sustainability performance, and also aligning with global reporting standards. Those are some of the critical areas. But also we understand the, global changing environment. We see also areas of intervention, particularly for executive CEOs or board, in providing sector-specific intervention or implementation toolkit. We see also, SME-focused sustainability program that could be also helpful, peer learning opportunities, mentorship between sustainability leaders and emerging companies, practical guidance on ESG reporting, climate transition. Those are some of the critical issues. We understand sustainable finance is now one of the emerging, area, and the private sector is also looking forward to really increase their capacity and knowledge in that area. Digital transformation, we have been talking about innovation and technology, and digital transformation is also another area. Artificial intelligence and how the private sector can leverage on technology and the artificial intelligence to translate, their commitment into implementable and action. So those are some of the area of intervention, but also there is also a considerable potential to strengthen collaboration. Everyone highlighted it, partnership, collaboration between businesses, government, academia, and development partners to co-create scalable solutions that respond to national development priorities that can help businesses to transition from, commitment to action. Basically, those are some of the critical areas I would mention. But what UN Global Compact is...
I'm so sorry. That's really clear and extremely helpful. Thank you. I think you've laid out very strongly what business needs from this sort of the sustainability and ESG side to then the actual being able to develop stronger scaling up sustainable business, to the engagement with policy, with academia, those sort of collaborations and partnerships. And you've also mentioned that particular element of sustainable financing, which I think is another clear area of need across all the sectors. So thank you very much indeed. And I'm only closing you down. It was so brilliant, but because we want to get Paul in before we then sort of open up the panel for discussion about how do we make it happen at scale. So Paul, if I can ask you to talk about, I guess, a couple of different things. It's about knowledge and how do we get knowledge into practice and policy. over to you.
No, thank you, Darren. And I followed you. I've taken off my jacket because we have a heat wave in Europe, which is unusual. I've done the same as you. So first, let me thank, it's great to celebrate the 10 years of SDG in practice with UNDESA and UNITAR. So I'm really glad to be invited to be here. So I just kind of, in my own head, I just wanted to hopefully quick enough get lessons from the past, present, and future, right? Not to be too Charles Dickens about it, but in 2016, I think I taught one of the first sessions actually in the SDG in practice. And I was in New York at the time with SDSN, but teaching a course on the foundations of the economics of sustainable development in CEPA in Columbia University. And I think what's kind of interesting about that session, I really was struggling with kind of welfare economics, where I kind of brought up, we have planetary boundaries by Rockström, so that's a good idea. We stay within planetary boundaries. We have a Nobel Prize winner, Amartya Sen, who talks about development freedoms and puts social protection floors of second division human rights. We have governance. We had Joe Stiglitz, another Nobel Prize winner, talking about the failure of multilateral institutions, globalizations, and disconnect. And then we had a future Nobel Prize winner in Darren Acemoglu and Robinson talking about why nations fail. But the problem is that even from this strict academic audience, we never bring equity, sustainability, and efficiency together. And we don't model it and talk about it. So at the same time, we bring these stakeholders into a room who are, government folks, private sector folks, civil society folks. And in a sense, we're asking them to have an SDG mindset. In other words, think over those 4 dimensions, how they link in everything you do, think about ecosystems and so on. So one of the big benefits, of course, then of bringing the stakeholders together is, even from an academic ivory tower point of view, it really teased out, the problems or what we have to do together to actually get SDGs implemented. And one of the big ones is every year the missions change. People in your secretariat change. There's always turnover. There always has to be a foundational and getting people back into systems thinking, SDG orientation system, looking at the 4 dimensions. So I really that was a lesson I kind of brought into any of the classrooms that I taught in the future, that we have to have science, policy, practice interface in the conversation, in the classroom all the time. That's how we actually develop our theories. That's how we go to practice and follow up and review and so on. Just bringing to the present in a sense, this is following on a recommendation that Ola made, is that we did a course in the SDG Academy called Revitalizing Multilateralism for a Sustainable Future. But what we actually did was to train stakeholders for the Summit of the Future. We took all the policy briefs that were being created. We went and did overlays and all the teaching and resources we had in libraries about all the theories that backed up the thinking. And then we followed it right up to the Pact for the Future and their annexes and up to the World Social Summit. So I actually think SDG in practice shouldn't just be HLPF. It's going to be an important HLPF in 2027, the post-2030 agenda, but they could, in theory, have this ongoing in all the important meetings, whether it's finance for sustainable development or science, technology, information, or youth, or whether it's gender, or whether it's, I'm missing something, partnerships. But there is an opportunity to always be upskilling and reskilling and getting stakeholders into a room. The future, if I can do it quickly, it was already mentioned by Mihoko in SDG Learn that we had a task force for business. And we actually want to take this stakeholder idea and go further. Stakeholders should be designing courses. They should be accrediting them together. They should be following up and reviewing them together. And we came up with this capabilities for the future, and hopefully we're going to do a practical example where out of Ireland, where we have global supply chains with our multinationals and even SMEs, like everyone's an intermediate product here, and we import and export, could we, in theory, learn to do inclusive and sustainable industrial development along supply chains by actually building capacities with the stakeholders on those particular supply chains, whether it's built environment or whether it's distribution, whether it's insurance or legal services, and so on. So the idea is to take what was in the SDG in practice, the importance of stakeholders, but actually to take that really serious, because if you teach together, credit together, follow up and review together, you're likely to be good partners and you implement together. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. In fact, that's a brilliant segue to the next question, because we'll be bringing all the panelists now back in, because we need to be able to answer the questions of how do we make this happen at scale. So you just gave a wonderful vision of a far more sort of collective and integrated approach to building capability. And I think the real question we have to answer, and we've heard a few of these capabilities that keep coming through. So certainly around data and data analysis, certainly around foresight and better planning. Of course, we have gender with digital transformation, the use of AI, sustainable financing, and really importantly, multi-sector partnership as well. So all of these things, the question to the panel now is, how do we make this happen at scale? How do we make it more integrated? How do we have it more sort of embodying the sort of SDG thinking of bringing together the science and the practice? So I'm just going to ask anyone wants to sort of just start answering that question, and then others can come in. Meanwhile, we have question and answer open as well. If any of the panelists would like to answer any of those questions too, then please do. But the overall question is, how do we make this happen at scale? And I'm going to pick on Alice because you smiled at the camera at just the wrong moment.
That's good, but that's the trick. But how do we make it happen at large scale? So first of all, I mean, I think that we need to, as I said, we need to ensure that we really, when we look at developing programs and initiatives, we integrate the elements, and we don't just, start from a narrow approach. But, I would ask my colleagues on all the things that have been presented, how are we integrating gender in all of those? So, and the truth is that we still have a challenge in many of these areas, and we are very in this conversation. We are also very, very clear that we have a strong backlash on gender equality and human rights at the moment in the global landscape in which we are working. But that's not an excuse, and cannot be an excuse for the UN to run away from those issues. It is in our charter, it is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the Secretary General has been very, very clear in his clarion call on gender equality on that, but still that is not happening. So we are not coherent with our principles and values, and we and therefore, if we look at, how do we make it happen, we need to start being much more coherent and integrating those in a much more, regular way in that regard.
The other one, how do we create the incentives to make that happen? Because no one's going to disagree with that. Absolutely, that is what we should do. Again, how do we make that happen? How do we shift the incentives? Who can help shift the incentives?
But who can help is shift incentive is the leadership. As I said before in the previous part, is the leadership. Leadership has to, shift those incentives, and the leadership, we have a Secretary General who's very committed on that. But then at the more, direct level, at the division, at the units level, at the representative levels, I've been in UN cities, in UN country teams where colleagues even question, gender equality. So how do we make it happen? As I said before, leadership and incentives in that regard. In terms of integrating also in terms of our guidances and our thinking and that system-wide thinking. And the third one is reinforcing this last point, is also about how do we really create together as the UN system, and not separately, but really as, that system thinking that the 2030 agenda is bringing us. And still, and I think the UN80 initiative is looking at addressing the issue of efficiency and effectiveness, because we are doing still things very much in silos, and we need to, bring those in a more in a more coherent manner. We also,
I'm so sorry, Alice. Just because of time, I'm going to cut you off. We only have 6 minutes left.
Okay.
But thank you. Hugely useful. We need to be more integrated within the UN system, but also, of course, with governments, with business, with others. Andrea, you are. Yes. Let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. So from a university perspective and from a small island perspective, we also have to recognize the importance of local context. So governments, universities, civil society, communities, private sector, international organizations like the UN, here we're talking with, we have to become a part of an evolving learning ecosystem, where knowledge is continuously generated, shared, adapted, applied. So for example, universities, we're not just educators, we're not just centers of education, we're not just knowledge brokers, but we have to be able to connect research, connect policy, innovation, community action, and that way we can partner for building greater resilience. Because, and I use the word resilience frequently because especially in small island states, we are daily dealing with the impacts of climate change and all the negative sides of what it is we're trying to address with addressing the SDGs. So you're having a heat wave in Europe, and we're talking about it, but when Jamaica experiences, for example, 102, that's not normal for us. We're normally hot, but that's not normal. And we're having water shortages, and this is across the entire Caribbean. We're having food insecurity issues across the Caribbean. So we are living it daily. And so it's important that we're able to make those connections. In the small areas that we are seeing positive results, mention it in the chat because I know we can't discuss everything on the platform, but we are seeing success where you're having private sector working with NGOs and local communities to build the kind of resilience that we want to see.
Thank you so much. And of course, there's also cross-learning. Europe can learn so much from the Caribbean about how to deal with many of these issues. You've had that experience. Marie-Claire, would you like to come in from the sort of business perspective? What are the routes to business, and how do we make it also more multi-sectoral, this capacity development?
Yeah, thank you very much, Darian. From the private sector perspective, what I would want to highlight, UN Global Compact, we have an online learning platform, Academy, which is providing a number of courses, particularly to the private sector who are part of our sustainability initiative. And the purpose is to, capacitate them and make sure that they move from, commitment to action. I give you an example of 2023 alone, the Academy reached to more than 116,000 course users across 160 countries globally, demonstrating the growing demand and also, the high reach at the global level. But how do we multiply that? So we have also taken another at country level, UN Global Compact country networks are also contextualizing, the content, and they make sure that they align with the national priorities. So if I give an example of Rwanda, so we work with
very quickly.
we work with a business association. For example, we are working with Association of Bankers to, come up with sector-specific, capacity building intervention. So to support businesses, this is an example. So I see, for example, opportunity to be intentional in our collaboration, working with, UNITAR and UNIDESA to, strengthen this and make sure that we expand our reach and ensure that businesses are empowered not only to support SDGs, but also to become the key drivers of the implementation of the SDGs. So thank you.
Claire, that's a fabulous example. It also fills one of the criteria we've set out at the beginning, which is that capacity development must be grounded in real implementation challenges, solving concrete problems, and sort of working at the level you're talking about ensures that. I'm going to ask Patrick, then Khaled, then Miyoko to just sort of give 1 minute each of your thoughts. Apologies, but we're running out of time.
So I agree with Andrea, and I think universities can be central to this. We do need what I call, or what we call in the UN library, actually, in the committees, is a global knowledge commons. And, you know, knowledge has to be free to create, to access, to disseminate. And we really don't have an observatory or a hub of data of OER, open education resources, or open science that can be just deployed at will right across the world. And I think that's very dangerous for any training or any ambition to do capacity building. So I would tell you to look at UNESCO's open science, open data, open OER recommendation and follow it really closely, and beg your governments to put in the appropriate legislation to do that, because we need to be able to share knowledge and create knowledge together and have knowledge equity and so on. The second thing is in silos, training in universities, training in the private sector, training in government, you know, we have to do it together. We have to actually bring that into one framing where there's accreditation that's recognized for all, and that's mobile, you know, particularly for people moving across nations like migrants and other things. So we don't take seriously the idea of educating together across the SACO, and the only way to do that is to accredit together and to have recognized training that's mobile across nation, and that's a real weakness for training and learning.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that builds very much on what Andrea was saying as well. So thank you both for those points. Khaled, just a quick point, and then Miyoko.
Yes, thank you. I think we really have to look at the existing incentive and in disincentive and why we keep working in a siloed manner. And you know, we need to be bold, and we need to be creative, and we need to be innovative to move towards truly integrated approach. And I completely agree with Alice. Leadership plays a critical role here, and leaders need to think not just short-term gains but long-term gains. In leadership, we are not talking about like real senior leadership, but everyone is a leader in their own community. So once again, everyone has to play a critical role. Well, thank you. Back to you, Darian.
Thank you so much, Miyoko. And Khaled, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Darian. And I think the benefit of going last is all the speakers have mentioned all the key points, so I have nothing left to talk about. But I'd like to emphasize one point. That is, I also heard from the co-speakers, is co-creation of trainings and solutions. Because sometimes we just develop a solution and take it to a country and we give it to them. And sometimes it doesn't match their reality and it doesn't match their needs. So I think whenever we are developing training solutions, everything has to actually be co-created. So it fits their reality and it is fit for purpose. Point number 2, I think Paul already mentioned about open data, open source tools. That should be one of the key focus. And the third point is this is the time to invest in AI, machine learning, and all of this emerging technology, because I think our SG mentioned yesterday, AI is moving at a runaway speed. This is the moment to kind of harness the power and make a difference, because we have too much data, we have too much complex problem, but this is a golden window of opportunity of utilizing this technology, harnessing this power, and making a difference. So I'll stop here and over to you.
Thank you so much, Khaled. Yes, a really important point. And what's brilliant is that we seem to have come to some sort of convergence. And of course, convergence is what we need. Far more sort of integrated approaches across all the different learning providers, far more development of curricula collectively across multiple sectors. The challenge is, this is now a challenge to funders, you need to fund the ecosystem here. You need to fund the platforms. You need to fund the engagement, and you need to do it at every level down to the indigenous knowledge that we've been hearing about. So that is the final challenge that will end this panel session. Panelists, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and insights. Very much appreciated. Back to the crew. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darian. Thank you, of course, all to the panelists for such a rich and practical discussion. I really feel we heard a wide range of perspectives on capacities needed for implementation, as well as the importance of connecting learning with institutions, partnership, and sustained support. And this discussion is so especially important as we move closer to the 2030 deadline and also prepare for next year's summit and begin to consider what comes next. An essential part of charting the way forward is to understand what works, prioritizing and scaling approaches that do demonstrate results and moving away perhaps from approaches that do not deliver sufficient impact. So this is all really useful for our broader thinking on capacity development, as well for the shaping the future of SDGs in practice. And just tapping into some of the points here, I really think the notion of co-designing is certainly something that I think we should look very closely at moving forward. From UN side, we really have to consider the UN as one family, and we need to focus on breaking down these barriers for collaboration and focus on the incentives that Alice and Mihoko stressed, which is so crucial for collaborations to work. And I certainly agree, of course, on Andrea's point on SID's strength is on their collaborative spirit. I'd like to also invite you to engage with DESA on the work on SID's partnership, as we're supporting member states through the SID's partnership framework. That is a key feature in driving implementation of sustainable development in SIDS. So now over to Niall to summarize all of these perspectives in a few minutes, maybe provide some closing reflection of what has come up here and consider some possible direction for the future of SDGs. So it's now my pleasure to invite Mr. Niall Pierre from UNITAR. Over to you, Niall. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you, colleagues, for this insightful discussion. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to ASG Bjorg Sandkjær and the UN DESA team, as well as ASG and Executive Director Michelle Giles McDonough, and my UNITAR colleagues. A special thanks to Darian Stibe for his expert moderation of this dialogue. We would also like to thank each of our panelists, Mihoko Kumamoto, Khaled Mashfiq, Paul Walsh, Andrea Clayton, Alice Shackelford, and Maria Claire, for their rich contributions. And finally, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us and for your active engagement in this collective effort to accelerate progress towards 2030. To wrap up the insightful conversation, I will just summarize. We've heard from ASG Bjorg Sandkjær, who opened by reminding us that while policy is vital, action implementation relies entirely on the capacity of people and institutions to translate these commitments into action. ASG Michelle Giles McDonough followed by stressing the need for a shift away from the business as usual, emphasizing that capacity development must move from a one-off training to a focus on institutional change and systems thinking. Ola then provided a foundational presentation on the last decade of learning, highlighting our series evolving from over 106 sessions from simple planning to complex data innovations and multi-stakeholder acceleration. Dr. Andrea Clayton spoke on the need to move past fragmented, sector-based planning in favor of collaborative learning ecosystems that address the specific institutional vulnerabilities of small island developing nations, for example. Ms. Alice Shackelford added a critical layer to the dialogue, asserting that gender, transformative leadership, and gender disaggregated data are not just add-ons, but absolute preconditions for the SDGs to be successful. Ms. Mihoko Kumamoto stressed the importance of enhancing statistical and data building capacities and using data from multiple sources to inform effective policies and evidence-based solutions. Khaled Mashfiq continued the dialogue by illustrating how satellite-derived evidence and geospatial analytics empower nation self-reliance and provide trusted information that is needed for rapid humanitarian response. Marie Claire highlighted the need to bridge the gap for businesses, particularly SMEs, by providing practical tools to operationalize sustainability within their corporate strategies. Paul Walsh contributed then by discussing the emphasis and the need to bring systems thinking into the classroom, bringing stakeholders into the education and course design to ensure aligned sustainable development across sectors. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard from a wide set of perspectives, from the United Nations to academia to civil society to the private sector. Across our discussions today, I take note of a few key themes. There is a need to stop operating in silos and to focus on multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approaches. We must move from building capacities of individuals only to a systems thinking approach and to building up institutions. And finally, solutions must be derived from data and evidence, not simply ad hoc. Looking forward, it is clear that there is a consensus to move to shift to a collective, data-driven effort that focuses on systems more than individuals. I'd like to echo Khaled at the end there, where he mentioned the co-creation of solutions as a necessity moving forward. With that, I think to conclude, let's approach this next few years up to 2030 with this spirit in mind, keeping the theme of this HLPF as a collective effort, keeping the theme of the SDGs in practice of bringing multi-stakeholders, multifactorial perspectives into solution building. And with that, I would like to conclude this insightful session and thank you everyone for joining and for engaging. Ola, I will then leave you to close out. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Niall, for wrapping up and also for being such a great partner to us in DESA. We really appreciate this collaboration. So on behalf of DESA and UNITAR, I'd like to thank you, our opening speakers, our moderator, Darian, all the panelists, and of course, everyone that has joined us today. We hope you found this useful as we did. We also thank the many partners who have contributed to the series over the past 10 years. So thank you again, and all of this will be extremely useful for us in DESA and UNITAR as we think about the way forward for the SDGs in practice and how we can boost these very good approaches that have surfaced. So thank you again for your participation, and we wish you a productive continuation at the high-level political forum this and next week. Thank you so much. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.